The moment people realize there are no consequences for disrespecting you, they stop seeing your kindness as strength. They see it as permission. Respect isn't lost in one dramatic moment. It disappears through the small behaviors you allow every single day. One of the most misunderstood truths about respect is that people rarely decide how to treat you on their own. They learn it from the standards you consistently enforce. Every interaction becomes a quiet lesson. Every time you remain silent after being insulted, excuse repeated disrespect, or abandon your own values just to avoid conflict, you send a message more powerful than words. This behavior is acceptable. Most people never intend to train others to undervalue them, yet they do it every day through small compromises that seem harmless in the moment. Human beings are natural observers of patterns. We instinctively search for limits, testing what is tolerated and adjusting our behavior accordingly. This is not always malicious. It is simply how social dynamics work. The uncomfortable reality is that weak boundaries invite stronger tests. Look closely at any relationship where respect has slowly disappeared. It rarely begins with a dramatic betrayal. It begins with small moments that go unchallenged. A sarcastic comment receives an uncomfortable laugh instead of a calm response. A promise is broken and you convince yourself it is not worth mentioning. Someone repeatedly interrupts you, speaks over you, or dismisses your opinions, and you remain quiet because you fear appearing difficult. Each incident seems insignificant on its own, but together they establish a pattern. People begin to assume that access to your time, energy, and patience comes without responsibility. Eventually, what once would have shocked you becomes normal. Respect is not stolen overnight. It erodes through repeated permission. The strongest people understand something that most never learn. Boundaries are not walls built to keep others out. They are filters that reveal who is willing to respect your standards. When you calmly refuse behavior that violates your values, you are not creating conflict, you are creating clarity. Those with honest intentions adjust because they value the relationship. Those who become angry, manipulative, or offended often reveal that they benefited from the absence of your boundaries. Their resistance is not proof that your limits are wrong. It is often proof that your limits are finally working. Notice how emotionally disciplined people respond when someone crosses a line. They do not explode with anger or deliver dramatic speeches. They remain calm, direct, and consistent. They understand that emotional outbursts weaken the message because attention shifts from the boundary to the reaction. Quiet confidence carries greater weight than emotional intensity. A simple, firm response delivered without apology often communicates more strength than endless arguments ever could. Predictable reactions invite manipulation, but calm consistency earns respect because it cannot be easily shaken. Perhaps the hardest lesson is accepting that setting boundaries will disappoint some people. Those who benefited from your endless availability may accuse you of changing. They may call you cold, selfish, or distant simply because you stopped accepting what once exhausted you. Do not mistake their discomfort for evidence that you are wrong. People often protest most loudly when they lose access to something they assume would always be available. Their reaction reveals their expectations, not your character. The moment you stop teaching people that your self-respect is negotiable is the moment they realize that access to you is a privilege, not an entitlement. Most people believe power is demonstrated through loud words, sharp arguments, or emotional displays. They think the person who speaks the longest or reacts the strongest is the one in control. Human psychology reveals the opposite. The individual who immediately defends themselves, raises their voice, or rushes to explain has already surrendered something valuable: the ability to choose their response. Emotional reactions are predictable, and anything predictable can be influenced. The moment someone knows exactly which words will make you angry, insecure, or desperate to prove yourself, they no longer need strength to control you. They only need to press the right emotional button. Silence breaks that pattern. It interrupts expectations, creates uncertainty, and quietly transfers psychological pressure back to the other person. The uncomfortable truth is that people often fear what they cannot read far more than what they can easily provoke. Watch what happens when someone insults another person in a group. Most expect an immediate argument, a defensive explanation, or an emotional outburst. They are prepared for conflict because conflict is familiar. But imagine the target simply looks at them, remains composed, and says nothing. Suddenly, the emotional balance shifts. The person who initiated the attack begins wondering whether they crossed a line, whether they were ignored intentionally, or whether others are silently judging them. The silence forces them to sit alone with the consequences of their own behavior. What anger could never accomplish, quiet composure often achieves in seconds. It leaves people confronting themselves instead of fighting you. This principle appears in everyday life more often than people realize. A manipulative coworker makes a sarcastic remark, expecting you to defend yourself. Instead, you acknowledge it with calm indifference and continue your work. A stranger online posts something offensive, hoping to pull you into an endless argument. You refuse to respond, and the conversation dies because it never receives the emotional fuel it was seeking. Even in personal relationships, silence can reveal more than confrontation. Someone who constantly tests your patience often becomes uncomfortable when you stop arguing altogether. Without your reaction, they lose the emotional control they depended on. They are no longer influencing your mood, and that uncertainty unsettles them more than any angry speech could. This does not mean silence should become avoidance or emotional suppression. There are moments when honest communication is necessary and healthy. The difference lies in intention. Silence is powerful when it is chosen from self-control, not fear. It is the discipline of refusing to let another person's emotions dictate your behavior. It creates space between stimulus and response, allowing wisdom to replace impulse. That brief pause protects your dignity because it prevents others from writing your emotional script. People who master this pause appear calm not because they lack feelings, but because they refuse to let feelings become weapons against them. The deepest form of influence has never depended on saying more. It depends on revealing less than people expect. When your emotions are not easily displayed, your intentions remain difficult to predict. Others begin watching you more carefully because they cannot comfortably define you. In a world where almost everyone reacts instantly, the person who remains composed becomes unforgettable. Calmness is mistaken for confidence. Confidence is mistaken for strength, and strength quietly commands respect without demanding it. The moment people realize they can no longer control your emotions is the moment they begin questioning their own power instead of yours. The greatest advantage a manipulative person can have over you is not superior intelligence, greater strength, or higher status. It is access to your emotions. The moment someone discovers what consistently excites you, angers you, frightens you, or makes you desperate for approval, they begin holding an invisible map to your behavior. Most people believe manipulation happens through lies or intimidation. More often, it happens through emotional predictability. A careless insult is used to provoke your anger. A compliment is offered to earn your trust. A guilty silence is created to make you chase reassurance. These tactics succeed because they bypass logic and go directly to emotion. The uncomfortable truth is that many people spend their lives believing they are making independent choices, when in reality they are simply reacting to emotional triggers someone else has learned to press. Observe the people who remain calm in difficult situations. They are rarely the loudest or the most aggressive. They do not rush to defend every accusation or answer every challenge. Instead, they pause. That pause is where their power lives. While others react instantly, they create space between the event and their response. In that space, emotion loses its authority and judgment takes its place. Most people never develop this habit because reacting feels natural. They mistake speed for strength. But immediate reactions often reveal hidden fears, insecurities, and desires. Every impulsive response gives away information about what controls you. The person who can read those patterns no longer needs to argue with you. They simply guide your emotions until you make the decision they wanted all along. This pattern appears in everyday life more than people realize. A coworker repeatedly challenges your ideas during meetings, hoping frustration will make you lose credibility. A friend uses guilt to pressure you into saying yes because they know you fear disappointing others. Someone close to you withdraws affection after a disagreement, expecting your discomfort to make you apologize, even when you have done nothing wrong. None of these situations require force. They depend entirely on emotional dependence. If your need for approval, peace, or recognition is stronger than your commitment to clear thinking, manipulation becomes almost effortless. The trap is invisible because it feels like your own choice. Emotional control is not about suppressing feelings or pretending nothing affects you. It is about refusing to let feelings become the author of your actions. You still experience disappointment, anger, and fear, but you no longer allow them to dictate your next move. This quiet discipline confuses manipulative people because they expect predictable reactions. They wait for your anger, but you remain composed. They expect you to explain yourself endlessly, but you answer briefly and move on. They attempt to provoke guilt, yet you calmly maintain your boundaries. Without an emotional reaction to feed on, their influence begins to disappear. They are forced to face someone whose behavior cannot be directed through pressure or emotional games. The deepest transformation happens within your own mind. When you no longer need constant approval, instant revenge, or endless validation, you become internally stable. Your decisions begin serving your values instead of your impulses. People sense this change without you announcing it. They recognize that your emotions are no longer available for negotiation, and that realization changes the way they approach you. Respect quietly replaces exploitation because emotional independence cannot be easily controlled. The day your emotions stop answering to everyone else is the day your life finally begins answering to you. Most people believe value is created by being seen everywhere, speaking to everyone, and making themselves constantly available. They assume that the more attention they give away, the more appreciation they will receive in return. Human psychology works in a far less comfortable way. What is constantly available quickly becomes expected, and what is expected slowly loses its impact. Attention is one of the few resources that grows in value the more carefully it is given. Every time you choose where your focus goes, you are quietly communicating what deserves importance in your life. People notice this even when they cannot explain why. They instinctively recognize that someone who guards their attention is also guarding their standards. The uncomfortable truth is that the people who desperately seek attention often destroy their own value by giving theirs away without thought. Watch how conversations unfold. There is always someone trying to impress the room, speaking longer than necessary, laughing louder than everyone else, hoping to remain at the center of every interaction. Then there is another person who listens more than they speak, responds only when they have something meaningful to add, and refuses to chase every opportunity to be noticed. Surprisingly, it is often the quieter person who leaves the stronger impression. Why? Because selective attention creates curiosity. When your focus is intentional instead of automatic, people begin wondering what earns it. Scarcity is not only about your presence, it is about your attention. The less freely it is given, the more meaningful it becomes. This principle extends far beyond conversations. Consider someone who reacts to every criticism, every message, every rumor, and every insult. Their mind becomes crowded with problems created by other people. They mistake constant engagement for strength, when in reality they have surrendered control over their own focus. Others begin directing their emotions simply by demanding attention. A single negative comment can ruin an entire day because it receives more mental energy than it deserves. The emotionally disciplined person understands something different. Not every voice deserves a response. Not every opinion deserves a place in your mind. By refusing to invest attention in distractions, they quietly weaken the influence those distractions have over them. People also reveal their intentions through the way they seek your attention. Some are interested in genuine connection. Others are interested only in your reaction. They provoke arguments, create unnecessary drama, or manufacture crises because they understand that emotional engagement is still engagement. The moment you stop rewarding those behaviors with your attention, they lose much of their power. This is why silence and indifference often succeed where confrontation fails. You are not punishing anyone. You are simply refusing to finance behavior that should never have been rewarded in the first place. The deepest transformation occurs when you realize that your attention shapes your identity. Whatever consistently occupies your mind gradually becomes part of your character. If your focus is consumed by approval, conflict, and distraction, your life begins reflecting those patterns. If your attention is directed toward purpose, discipline, meaningful relationships, and long-term growth, your presence naturally becomes calmer, stronger, and more difficult to shake. People begin respecting you not because you demanded it, but because your focus reveals that your inner world cannot be easily invaded. The rarest form of power is not having everyone's attention. It is possessing the discipline to decide who and what deserves yours. The hardest decision most people will ever face is not standing their ground. It is knowing when to stop fighting for someone who has already shown them who they are. Human nature encourages persistence. We are taught that if we explain ourselves better, love harder, work longer, or become more patient, people will eventually recognize our value. That belief is comforting, but it is often the foundation of unnecessary suffering. There comes a point when continued effort no longer builds a relationship, it simply protects an illusion. The uncomfortable truth is that many people are not afraid of losing you. They are afraid of losing the convenience you provide. As long as you remain available despite being ignored, disrespected, or repeatedly disappointed, there is little reason for them to change. Your willingness to stay quietly teaches them that your standards can be negotiated. Walking away interrupts that lesson. It replaces endless explanations with undeniable reality. Observe the quiet dynamics that exist beneath everyday relationships. One friend is always the first to call, always the first to apologize, always the one keeping the connection alive. One employee consistently accepts extra responsibilities because they fear disappointing others. One partner repeatedly forgives broken promises because they hope the next conversation will finally be different. At first, these actions appear generous. Over time, however, they become expected rather than appreciated. Human beings adapt quickly to what is consistently available. What once earned gratitude gradually becomes routine, and routine slowly erases value. This is why people often notice your worth only after your effort disappears. Your absence exposes what your constant presence concealed. Walking away is frequently misunderstood as anger, revenge, or emotional withdrawal. In reality, it is often the clearest expression of emotional maturity. It is the recognition that self-respect cannot survive where your dignity must be sacrificed to maintain someone else's comfort. The strongest people do not leave because they have stopped caring. They leave because they have stopped believing that endless sacrifice can change someone who has no desire to change. They understand a painful truth. You cannot negotiate respect with a person who benefits from disrespecting you. Every additional explanation weakens your position because it assumes that the problem is a lack of understanding rather than a lack of willingness. This principle extends beyond relationships. It applies to toxic workplaces, one-sided friendships, and environments that constantly demand your energy while giving little in return. Every place you remain, despite knowing better, slowly reshapes your identity. You begin accepting behavior that once felt unacceptable. You lower your expectations to match your circumstances instead of raising your standards to protect your peace. The greatest danger is not what others do to you, it is what repeated tolerance convinces you to believe about yourself. Emotional discipline means recognizing the moment when staying becomes more destructive than leaving. There is a quiet confidence in someone who can close a door without slamming it. They do not seek revenge, public validation, or dramatic final speeches. They simply refuse to invest their time where their character is repeatedly discounted. That calm departure unsettles people because it cannot be controlled. It forces others to face the consequences of their own choices without giving them another opportunity to manipulate the outcome. Some will follow because they genuinely value you. Others will remain where they are because they only valued your willingness to stay. In either case, the truth finally becomes impossible to ignore. The moment you choose your self-respect over your fear of losing people is the moment you discover who was truly worth keeping in your life. One of the quietest reasons people lose respect is not because they are weak, but because they become completely predictable. Human beings are constantly observing patterns, even when they are unaware of doing it. They notice who always says yes, who always apologizes first, who always forgives without consequence, and who can be emotionally provoked with the same words every time. Once these patterns become clear, something changes beneath the surface. Curiosity disappears, caution fades, and people begin acting with greater confidence because they believe they already know exactly how you will respond. The uncomfortable truth is that predictability often invites familiarity, and excessive familiarity can quietly erode respect. It is not mystery alone that commands attention. It is the inability to be easily controlled through expectation. Think about the people who seem to carry quiet authority wherever they go. They are not inconsistent or deceptive, but they are emotionally disciplined. They do not reward every compliment with excitement or every insult with anger. They do not reveal every opinion the moment it enters their mind, nor do they feel compelled to explain every decision they make. Their behavior follows principles rather than impulses. Because of this, others struggle to predict exactly how they will react in situations designed to provoke them. That uncertainty creates a subtle psychological distance. People become more thoughtful around them because careless behavior no longer guarantees a familiar outcome. Respect often grows in the presence of those who cannot be easily read through emotional habits. The opposite pattern is visible everywhere. Someone who always answers every message immediately teaches others that waiting is unnecessary. A coworker who never refuses extra work eventually becomes the automatic choice whenever responsibility needs to be shifted. A friend who constantly tolerates sarcasm or broken promises unintentionally teaches others that there will never be meaningful consequences. None of these patterns begin with malicious intent. They are simply reinforced over time because human beings naturally repeat behaviors that continue to work. When there is no reason to adjust, there is rarely any motivation to change. The lesson is uncomfortable because it means people are often responding less to your words than to the behavioral patterns you have trained them to expect. This does not mean you should become erratic, manipulative, or intentionally confusing. True strength is not found in playing psychological games. It comes from becoming internally guided instead of externally reactive. When your choices are based on values rather than emotional pressure, you stop behaving according to other people's expectations. Sometimes you speak, and sometimes you remain silent. Sometimes you forgive, and sometimes you walk away. The difference is that your actions are determined by judgment, not habit. People can no longer predict you simply by pushing the same emotional buttons because those buttons no longer control your behavior. The deepest transformation occurs when you realize that respect is closely tied to self-command. The more predictable your emotional reactions become, the easier it is for others to influence your decisions. The calmer and more intentional you become, the more difficult it is for anyone to manipulate your direction. People begin approaching you with greater care, not because they fear your anger, but because they understand that your standards are steady while your reactions are not automatic. In a world where most individuals are driven by impulse, emotional discipline becomes an uncommon form of influence. The moment people realize they can no longer predict your reactions, they stop testing your limits and start respecting your boundaries.